back. I'm glad to see you stuck around long enough to catch the next video in the Gray Man series here. I'm TC, I'm the old gray man, and today we're going to talk about the appearance of a gray man. The first and most obvious element of being a gray man is that of appearance. Generally speaking, people see you first, usually long before they hear you, smell you, or certainly touch you. How you look can go a long way towards keeping your profile low, or indeed raising it. If a low profile is the direction you want to go, then dress accordingly. If you dress like those around you, it will enable you to blend passively with your environment. That is, your appearance alone will help you go gray. If you look like you belong where you are, you're going to pass better as one of the crowd and be much less noticeable and less likely to stand out. This is critical if you want to avoid being noticed by someone who sees you from a distance or is scanning the crowd. You want people to simply gloss over you. You never want them to perceive that you're there in the first place. You want to sort of be white noise, visual white noise, if you will. Just kind of part of the scenery. Once you've dressed appropriately, your appearance is generally set. It's always on, and it doesn't really need any further involvement on your part until and unless your environment changes. Like I'm constantly saying on this channel, pay attention. You're going to notice when and if your surroundings change enough to require you to change your appearance, or indeed to just depart the area. Your look can be changed on the fly, but it's not always the easiest thing to do. It generally requires you to carry clothing with you, which may or may not be feasible depending on what you're up to and where you are. It's usually much easier to just dress in a way that is going to allow you to look low profile in the specific situation you expect to be in. If you foresee your circumstances changing along the way, understand there are certain challenges you're going to have to face if you want to maintain this low profile appearance. Adding or removing a hat, for example, it's simple and it's fast. This hat doesn't take up a lot of room, it's easy to carry, it's easy to conceal on your person. You can generally change a hat or put one on, take it off with a minimum amount of noticeable fuss, so that making such a change and without being noticed by others is very practical. The same can be said of putting on or taking off a sweatshirt or a jacket, although carrying such a garment might provide a bit of a challenge of its own. You can always just throw the clothing away when you take it off, but tossing out clothing all the time can become pricey pretty quickly. But it is an option. Swapping out your pants and shoes can also be done, but here we find more significant challenges. Carrying shoes and pants can kind of be bulky, and people also tend to notice someone openly carrying a pair of pants or a pair of shoes as they walk down the street. You can mitigate this by placing those items in a bag or a backpack, but then this requires some additional thought as well in order to stay gray, because now you've added another bulky item, difficult to conceal, into the mix. And let's not forget also that changing your shoes and or pants also takes time, and both will generally get the attention of those around you if done openly. As a rule, changing pants requires a degree of privacy, I like to hope, if it is to be done without drawing the attention of everyone within eyesight. This can also be a lot more time consuming, especially if your pockets are full of your everyday carry gear and all that has to be swapped from one pair of pants to another. Understand also that by the time you realize you need to change your clothing, it's often too late. Of course, if things change too fast for you to leave or change clothing, you're not going to be the only one standing off base and stuck with this new reality. Others will have been caught as well, so at least you'll have them to blend in with if need be. All of this can make a bit of a logical challenge for you in trying to be gray if you're going to carry around extra clothing with you all the time. It's really much easier to make a habit of dressing in a low profile manner in order to fit into the most varied set of surroundings and circumstances that you expect to run into. To do this, wear the expected clothing for the area. Think of it as a uniform, if that helps. For example, me wearing a uniform when I was in the Army made me almost invisible when I was on post and surrounded by hundreds of others dressed just like me. Nobody noticed me as being any different from anyone else until they got up close and started reading my uniform. If you're just walking around your local community, have a style that facilitates your gray man lifestyle. Muted colors and slightly roomy fit are the rule for me. Comfortable is key. Most folks just don't make a habit of wearing uncomfortable clothing, with a notable exception being that a huge chunk of women's fashion, especially shoes, are just not comfortable or don't appear comfortable at all. Do with that information what you will. Dressing for your environment might mean deviation from this standard is required sometimes. Sporting events, for example, can dictate such a change. The university I went to as an undergraduate had school colors that were red and white. When the football team played a home game, everyone wore red and white clothing to show their support. And as you got closer to the stadium, the streets and bars and what have you would just be full of red and white attired people. So walking around in that environment, not wearing red and white, kind of made you stand out a whole lot more. Dress appropriate to your age. This has become more and more important to me as I've aged. When my 6-year-old son wears a blazer, a fedora, and khaki pants, people notice him. He's adorable, sure, but he looks like he's heading off to star in a conservative podcast somewhere. Likewise, if you're in your 60s and you're still wearing board shorts and Chuck Taylors when you live, 500 or 1,000 miles from the nearest surfable beach, people are going to notice you. So if getting noticed is your objective, rock on. If not, well, remember, bright colors are noticeable. The gray man avoids them unless called for in a particular situation. For example, I ran the bulls once in Pamplona, Spain. That was an experience. But those who ran wore white pants, white shirts, a red bandana around the neck, and a red sash around the waist. I'm sure the bulls loved that. But that's what I wore, right? So certainly striking colors, noticeable colors under most circumstances. But in that environment, I effectively disappeared into a sea of people dressed exactly like me. Had I been wearing earth tones, I would have stood out a lot. Logos are noticeable, but they're really not the end of the world as some might have you believe. Context, as always, is important. Logos on clothing is a point of remembrance to some people, typically those who have an interest in the particular topic that is addressed by that logo. For example, if you go to a Red Sox home game wearing a Yankees jersey, you'll see exactly what I mean. But if you go to that same game wearing a Red Sox jersey, you're going to fall immediately into the background. Those who do notice you will very likely only remember your jersey and maybe your skin tone, if that. I always love it in movies when actors wear a baseball hat and sunglasses in order to disguise themselves. While such a disguise may well make it more difficult for an eyewitness to effectively describe and identify you later in a lineup of some kind, it does precious little to make you less noticeable in the first place. Context notwithstanding, it can often just stand out in a crowd, so keep that in mind. Tactical, or shoot me first gear, as some people call it, gets a lot of attention in the gray man discussions I've heard. People seem to have some very strong opinions on how this kind of clothing and equipment impacts one's ability to go gray. Me, I'm fairly ambivalent about it. I still own plenty of this stuff from my career as a federal law enforcement agent, though I don't wear much of it very often anymore. I have friends from back in the day that always ran around looking like a 511 catalog had exploded on them, and that was their choice. And in that environment, it was a little bit different than being an old retired gray man. I call that type of clothing cool guy clothing. Some people call it tactical, whatever you want to call it. It's really clothing that is either straight up from the military, it's based on military designs, or it has symbols, emblems, writing that announce that the wearer is to be seen and feared. But the reality is most people are just pretty unobservant. They do not pay much attention to others, and when they do, the majority folks may be able to tell military style clothing, but they don't really have a clue on what tactical clothing is. Of course, we're not really worried about most people. Many cops and defense-oriented citizens can also recognize tactical clothing. They know what it looks like because they own it and they wear it and their friends wear it and they look at it in magazines and they see it all the time. It shows up a lot in their social circles and their daily life. When they see it, they notice it, they pay attention to it, and they pay attention to the person wearing it. For the most part, again, we're not worried about these folks beyond our general desire to be unnoticed by anyone if we're trying to go the route of the gray man. But who we are worried about are those bad actors. People who are willing to engage in criminal predation and violence, who might key in on tactical attire. While most of those folks don't know any more about such clothing than anyone else, some of them do. There are bad actors who know exactly what cops look like and how they dress, which means they often recognize tactical clothing when they see it on anyone. Now, I've heard an argument made that appearing to others, including these potential bad actors, to be someone who's prepared for any eventuality, including violence, is a good thing. I've heard others say that they are safer if they appear to be a law enforcement officer or a soldier or just a person who can and will take care of themselves. The argument is that dressing in a tactical fashion with these tactical items is a deterrent to being attacked. Okay, fair enough. But to me, such an approach sacrifices some anonymity, and it relies on your appearance to intimidate or at least show the bad actors that they are in for more of a fight attacking you because you're wearing these clothing items. Tactical posturing, if you will. Knowing that bad actors tend to want a victim and not a fight, this method probably has some merit if your only concern is preventing attack. Of course, it leaves the choice of whether or not to engage up to the miscreant, right? And I got to tell you, depending on rational decisions from a criminal can be a very iffy proposition. Certainly it might work. It also might not. The problem, therefore, as I see it at least, is that at this point when you've dressed like this, the decision's not up to you. The choice as to whether or not you're going to be victimized or on the receiving end of an attack is no longer up to you. You've given that choice up to the bad guy. And the villain may make rational thought decisions, he may not make rational decisions. The gray man approach is one that seeks to avoid all those problems in the first place by just not being noticed at all. Bad guys don't get to choose to avoid you or choose not to avoid you because they never notice you in the first place. Nobody notices the gray man, neither the good guys nor the bad guys. This in turn leaves the maximum number of options available to that person who's going gray. I would suggest this is the better way, but to each his own. This might rustle some jimmies, but if you want to go gray, don't openly carry a firearm. Now listen to what I said. I'm not saying that you should not carry a firearm for self-defense. Not saying that at all. I support the right to carry firearms wholeheartedly, and carrying openly is part of that approach, and I support your right to do so. However, it's bad tactics, and I would never do it. So I don't recommend it, especially if you're trying to go gray. An openly carried firearm is noticeable. Indeed, it draws attention like a magnet. If this is your goal, for whatever reason, fine, but understand that it is not going to help you in your cause to avoid attention. So put all this together. How you dress stems from your mindset, and it complements your behavior. Context is critical, and you should always dress with that in mind. When you're walking the path of the gray man, how you appear is going to go a long way in keeping you from being noticed, which is the point of the entire effort. If you found this entertaining, helpful, which I hope you did, please like, share, and subscribe. It's insane how much that helps. I had no idea that it would do so, but it does. Also, I got to take a moment to shout out to these folks out there that are creating content on a weekly basis. Much props to that. I just can't seem to find enough time in the day to do that. I give kudos to those of you who can. Thank you again for watching. Take care, be safe, and stay low.